Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a colossal shift that, according to the sources we've analyzed, is completely remapping global power and wealth. And here's the key takeaway. The next stage of the AI revolution, it doesn't start in the cloud. It starts right here in the physical world.
Right, the conversation has officially gone way beyond just chatbots. We are now talking about embodied AI, robots and machines that can actually interact with and change the world around them. And this isn't some sci-fi dream. It's happening right now, and it's scaling up incredibly fast.
And look, this is not just some high-end tech for massive corporations anymore. You have companies like Unitree Robotics already selling humanoid robots at a price point that's aimed at consumers. A price tag like that sends a pretty clear message, doesn't it? They're aiming for mass production and, eventually, mass adoption. The robot revolution is being built for the factory floor and, yeah, maybe your front door.
Okay, so let's really get into this. How do our sources frame what's happening? Well, they don't see it as some slow, gradual change. It's way more like a sudden, tectonic shift.
You know, that quote says it all. And it's coming directly from the CEO of Nvidia, the company that is literally building the hardware that makes all of this possible. This isn't a prediction for 10 years from now. At big tech shows like CES 2026, the message from the industry was loud and clear. The focus is on machines that can learn in a simulation and then operate out here, in our reality.
The speed and the scale here are just staggering. By the end of 2025, a single company based in Shanghai, Agibot, had already shipped 5,000 of these humanoid robots. So while a lot of companies in the West are still showing off prototypes, others are already hitting mass production. That puts unbelievable pressure on the entire market to keep up.
But, and this is a huge but, to power this entire robotic future, the sources all point to one massive, unavoidable bottleneck that completely changes the game: energy.
So, here's the absolute crux of the issue. The single biggest thing holding back AI's growth isn't the software, it's not even the silicon chips. According to major players like Elon Musk and BlackRock's Larry Fink, it's the physical impossibility of powering it all with the grid we have now. Suddenly, every single form of energy is back on the table.
This chart really just lays it all out, doesn't it? It's pretty stark. While our global electricity supply is growing by maybe a few percent a year, the demand for AI compute power is just exploding, growing exponentially. We're basically building these incredible digital brains, but starving them of the power they need to actually think.
And we're not just talking about flipping a switch here. This whole transition requires a global mobilization of an unbelievable amount of physical stuff. You need fossil fuels to power the grid, you need tons of copper and silver for all the wiring and components, you need rare earth minerals for the high-tech parts, and you need insane amounts of water just for cooling. This is a full-blown industrial-scale build-out.
So what happens when everybody on the planet needs the same finite resources all at once? Well, according to this analysis, you get a fundamental reshaping of global alliances and a whole lot of new conflicts.
The sources point to the Arctic as a major battleground. Suddenly, Greenland, with its huge, untapped deposits of rare earth minerals, becomes strategically vital. If you can control those minerals, you can break your dependence on the current supply chains. It's a game changer.
And it's not just about what's under the ice. As the climate shifts, new shipping routes are opening up in the north. These passages are absolutely critical for transporting all those resources we just talked about, which makes controlling the Arctic a top security priority for a lot of countries.
The analysis also suggests that there's a huge driver behind this big push for stability in the Middle East, and it's all about securing its massive energy resources. The world's AI data centers are incredibly thirsty for power, and the Gulf nations are in a prime position to provide it. That gives them enormous leverage in this new world.
So what all this scrambling adds up to is a major shift away from the old world order. The new system being described here isn't based on military might alone. Power is now about who controls the resources, who controls the technology, and who controls the massive pools of international capital you need to fund the whole shebang.
So, that's the big question, right? How on earth is this colossal transition being paid for? Well, the sources argue that it requires a complete teardown and rebuild of the global financial system, and that the process is often incredibly volatile and, frankly, brutal.
The sources we looked at describe what is basically a repeatable playbook. First, you engineer some kind of instability in a market or a region. Second, you deploy financial weapons, things like huge short positions or derivative attacks. Third, when the crisis hits, you swoop in and buy up valuable assets for pennies on the dollar.
And finally, the debt and the losses, they get pushed onto the public.
To give you a sense of scale, just look at this number. This is the amount of wealth that the source material claims was wiped out of the gold and silver markets in a single week. $15 trillion. That's about half the annual GDP of the entire United States. It just shows you the sheer force of the financial powers at play and the kind of volatility they can create.
And look, this isn't some fringe idea. You have major financial figures like Ray Dalio being quoted as saying that these events signal a fundamental breakdown of the whole fiat currency system. When the central banks themselves start shifting into assets like gold, that's a pretty powerful signal that a massive reset is already happening.
Okay, but what does all of this great reconfiguration, this massive transfer of wealth and power, what does it actually mean for you and me, for the average person?
The sources draw a direct line from this chaos to your personal security. I mean, think about it. When multi-billion-dollar banks are collapsing in both the US and China, and trillions can be vaporized from markets in a day, the stability of everyone's savings, their pensions, their investments, all of it gets called into question.
And then, beyond the financial risk, you have this direct warning coming from institutions like the International Monetary Fund. The entire point of building all this physical AI and robotics infrastructure is, when you boil it all down, to replace human labor. And that is projected to cause a massive shock to the labor market, leading to widespread unemployment.
So how do you manage that kind of societal shock? Well, the material suggests a whole new toolkit is being proposed, and it includes things like digital IDs, central bank digital currencies, social credit systems, and universal basic income. You could see it as a kind of technocratic grid designed to manage a population that's increasingly cut out of the traditional economy.
And that really brings us to the final, really provocative question that this analysis leaves us with. As power shifts away from traditional nations and towards those who control the resources, the capital, and the technology, we have to ask, who will ultimately be in charge in this AI-driven future? It's not just about who owns the land anymore. It's about who owns the code.